Why would I start a talk about street art with a penny black stamp? Well, some of the things that we're going to talk about today are how can we have better public spaces, how can we do that through art, and what are the possibilities for our cities, especially London, but I'm going to ask you to cast your imagination wider and imagine this happening all around the world. So the penny black, 1837 or so. Previously, the postal system, the burden of postage, the cost of postage was borne by the recipient. So you'd send a letter and the postage service would have to try and find who that letter was being sent to and get the money off them. Now that created an administrative burden for for what was then the prototype to Royal Mail that wasn't really working. It wasn't very efficient. And so there was a change that happened after that with the adhesive stamp, where the burden of cost was borne by the sender. And so that had a really interesting impact. Basically, there was a change in administration, and that administration allowed a culture to flourish and a culture to scale. So what happened in the sort of after 1840s is this change in administration led to the flourishing of letter writing. And that's really what I'm kind of going to try and get to today, is that if you can change the administration, you can help support a culture in a different way. So culture does happen. I'm not debunking a myth that culture just can't happen organically, but I want to talk about is if you change the administration, you can help support that culture, and that's quite empowering. So I'm going to stand back a bit. I'll talk about three main trends today in public space. The first is what's happened in street art as an art form. The second is street art festivals, which didn't really exist 10 years ago. And the third is kind of commercial opportunities for artists, which are important because if you can make a living, you can do more things with it. So personal background, I have a split background. On the one hand, I was a scientist, I have a PhD in maths and evolution. And on the other hand, I used to breakdance for the UK. A bit weird, go ahead. After I blew out my knee, I got a big injury. And after I left finance, which was a job that happened after science, I ended up moving in Spain. And because I couldn't dance anymore, I started taking lots and lots of photos of street art. And I was going to all these places, and I realized this was really kind of like a hidden art form. Some of the best art that I could see just wasn't being seen by anyone. So I ended up traveling to lots of different countries, about 25, and took about 60,000 photos. And then I did what a scientist would do, massive geek, admittedly, and classified all of those photos by artist, technique, location, what surface it was on. And you can look for really crazy things in the data. And that's smoking monkeys, and there's lots of those around the world. And when you start looking at it, you can pull that out. There's all smoking monkeys. I have about 20 of those, and those are some of my favorites. So fast forward a bit, co-founded Global Street Art with my business partner, and Global Street Art does 3 or 4 things, really. So the first thing is we've got the largest online street art photo archive. It's globalstreetart.com, about 180,000 fans on social media. The point of that is artists sign up to the platform, and we share their photos with our fans and help drive them new fans. So that's the first kind of level of support. And then the next thing, I love this. This is like a virtual swipe. It's great. Don't go on. That was a joke. The second thing, I said our platform extends from the website to the real world. So since 2012, we've organised over 800 legal street art murals. It is roughly over half of the Brick Lane area, but I don't paint, so we have to be very careful how much credit we take for that. But it's a 1%, that kind of administration that happens at the beginning that then allows artists to go out and do really sort of beautiful things. So that's part of it. And then a third arm of what we do is this kind of commercial side. So it's trying to bring back kind of notions of sort of hand-painted advertising and things of that nature. And it's also things like, doing interior. So providing that platform, paid platform for work for artists as well. And in amongst that, there's also this fun idea in this kind of social media age of combining art and technology. So we do things like projected live art battles as well. So let me give you a quick history lesson, because I mentioned those 3 trends. The trends in street art, talking about what's changed in the art form, what's changed in street art festivals, and also what's changed in terms of the commercial stuff. So going back 50 years ago, graffiti, which street art came out of graffiti, but it's also another kind of thing that happens in sort of public space, writing letters. It was predominantly on trains, came from East Coast America, originally Philadelphia, and moved to New York. And back then, the internet obviously didn't exist, but trains essentially were the internet. So the way to be seen, to have your friends see your artwork, you'd paint the outside of the train, and the train would take your artwork to another side of the city. And so that was how people would kind of share their sort of information. When you use words like street art or graffiti, they mean different things. So if I use either of those words, they can be an art form, a crime, and or a subculture. So what we're interested in celebrating is can you celebrate and push the art form or support the art form when the crime element has been somewhat has been removed. So in the 50 years since that sort of train photo, or 40, 50 years since that train photograph, technology has changed a lot. Most of the street art that we see today isn't actually on the street anymore, really. It's online. It drops through your news feed, et cetera, et cetera. And so you share it. You share the better stuff. And that means that people have got a propensity to see higher quality street art and to know just how good it can be because that's what your friends are sharing. The trends I'm going to talk about, I mentioned before, the first two are kind of covered in our book. This came out in October. And so the first major trend for street art is what's happened to the art form itself. So this is graffiti, standard letter-based graffiti, letters like you saw on the train, but it's far more technical, really beautiful, and it's really kind of progressed in terms of colours and everything else. So, but that's graffiti. Street art. Well, it's got to get that, wait for that, there you go. But street art is everything else that's not graffiti that's kind of out there on the street. And a lot of people think of stencils as the basis of street art because everyone's familiar with Banksy. But, you know, stencils are only one technique. Stencils are only one technique, and this is a Cash and Lani from New York, but I think that's in Finland. But just about any technique is possible today. Street art isn't just about using spray paint. It can be using just about any material. And pretty much the kitchen sink, maybe not, but the kitchen sieve, certainly. So this is pressed against an artist's face, and it catches a beautiful shadow. It's by Isaac Cordell. So the techniques have grown enormously. Now, street art as an art form, this word is just a catch-all phrase for just about every kind of art that happens to be outside and not particularly commissioned. So it encompasses lots of things like reinterpreting past masters. This is a piece, you know, it's really advanced 3D. These are all called street art, but they're so different to each other. Photorealism, painting things that are highly realistic. And then text-based work, legible text, font work that harks back to kind of the golden era of sort of sign writing. And then calligraphy, and then, you know, abstract work as well. So we call all of this stuff street art, but what I want you to take from this section is that the techniques have broadened enormously, and the aesthetics that underpin what we're all calling, you know, what is all essentially called street art is far broader today than we probably give credit for generally. Not only, you know, one of the things that separates street art from kind of normal art or gallery-based art is the context. The context is different. And so street art has got this amazing ability because the canvas has already got a scratch on it. It's already got a mark to interact with the world around it. And so you can see artists doing great things, turning spaces into faces and using the plants and trees. And, you know, when you think about a canvas, you think about a sort of flat surface, but our cities aren't like that. Walls are irregular, walls are strange, and artists are doing beautiful things in situ and in a context that's very different. So this is by a German artist, Lake Painting in Mexico. You know, and you don't have to think about just walls either. It isn't just walls, no matter how irregular it's. You know, artists are painting things like pillars and just about anything. Now, this takes us to the next trend in street art. So this is festivals. About 10 years or so ago, there weren't really any well-organized, or maybe just one or two around the world, well-organized street art festivals. What is a street art festival? It's when you have a level of administration that facilitates a number of different artists doing things on a bigger scale than they might otherwise be able to do independently. So this is a ship in Wales, which, you know, is useless as a ship because it doesn't sail, obviously. But it's a beautiful canvas for street art. And one of the things that I'd like to impart on you guys is that street art is potentially a low-cost tool for urban regeneration because you can totally change people's perception of a space really with just a coat of paint. And so these are examples just from the UK of different street art festivals just within the UK. So that was in Wales. This is a See No Evil festival in Bristol. This is in Cardiff. And then these are some of the examples of pieces that we've organised over the last few years. And so that's it. Trend 2 then, street art festivals. Now what's this? Advertising. You know, there's a lot of commercial opportunities within street art. One of the ones, or within street art generally, or hand painting, one of the ones that I find the most interesting and compelling to talk about and discuss is advertising, because advertising affects public space. And billboards, when we practice this talk, I swore I'm not going to, they're not particularly attractive generally. And there's a lot of them. They can be quite oppressive. Now, it's not street art anymore. This is advertising, but it's hand-painted advertising. And we've got this kind of nostalgia for ghost signs. And it's the idea that it is advertising, but it's about as close to an art form as you can take advertising. If it's, you know, and it's not street art anymore, but it's, can we reuse things like hand painting to do something that's kind of enriches public space? So this is an example project that we did last October or so. It's an 18-metre long mural. The client was a property developer, and it was all based on British inventors centres, and we kind of fractured those portraits. So it is advertising, but it's very different from the billboards that I showed you before. And if it is possible to enrich public space through advertising, I'm not saying it is, I'm not sure it is, but it's certainly something I think worth aiming for. So that's kind of what I want to say about the advertising. And now going back to that notion of administration, how do you scale this when you've essentially got a kind of a craft with lots of different artists interacting? How do you support them? So we ran a competition with Londonists, a big London blog, around June or July of last year, and we said, nominate your neighbourhood for a street art festival. And to our surprise, it was, totally wasn't sure how that would turn out. But 7 neighbourhoods across London came forward and said, we want a street art festival. Can we have a street art festival? And Brockley won the Street Art Festival with over 900 votes. 900 votes out of about 3,500 in total. And so we've got a street art festival happening there in May or June. And the idea behind this is, how do we figure out a process of working with local people who are interested in bringing it to their neighbourhood to help them get permission for walls and help work with them to try and get funding. And the Brockley team has been amazing. And we're kind of advising based on what we've learned and putting artists kind of their way as well. So that was one thing. A second thing that happened towards the end of last year, we got really lucky, really fortunate. We won with a partner, a forest recycling project. We applied and got a £50,000 grant from ITV through the National Lottery, with which we get to do some fun things, teaching workshops in schools, giving away 6,000 litres of paint to low-income families, and painting 9 big murals across London. But it shows that there's this real demand, that people kind of do want street art in their neighbourhoods as well. And then some more examples of us, where working with different institutions and partners, we can help take that administrative burden away from artists, so they don't have to go get permission for a wall one day, come back to the same space another day. It doesn't work if you're an international or kind of travelling artist, and you don't have the time or maybe the local knowledge or the language skills to do that. So it's about facilitation, just like the Penny Black, doing that on behalf of folks. So what does this mean for our city? Which is kind of the last things that I want to take you guys through. So I'm going to show you 3 photographs of hoardings, and they all are not very nice. So this is, most building site hoardings. It's kind of bland and boring, and there's a lot of this around our city. Wouldn't it be nicer if it looked something else? Well, if you can't get permission for it, sometimes this is what happens. And whether or not the artists want to spend time doing it, if you can't get permission, then you just can't do that. And then one of the worst things is, well, if the quicker, lower quality stuff goes on the hoardings, it just gets buffed. You have 3 conditions that aren't very attractive. We prefer this as an alternative. So we're looking after, through 2 different construction companies, 2 blocks worth of city hoardings in East London. And when you come up with a system of kind of permission letters, which is what we look to do, and you bear in mind that it's a building site first, and there's site safety signs, and we've laminated those because those need to be protected, with not much additional effort, you can facilitate artists going out, 5 minutes of printing and giving a permission letter, some ladders and a map, and maybe some free paint left over from the commercial jobs. You can have an artist who can spend, 8 hours, however long they want, doing something that's really amazing. And I think you'll agree that that kind of outcome is better than the 3 alternatives: the blank, the buffed, and the lower quality tagging stuff that I showed you before. And it gets this site gets featured quite a bit. It's a big part of street art tours. Now, final points. London is a cultural capital of the world. In order to maintain that reputation, I feel it's important that we kind of support that culture and facilitate artists to be able to go out and paint. And cities like Łódź in Poland have got big, beautiful murals, and there's this trend around the world for this increasing help with administration, and we don't want London to fall behind, and that's one of the things that we're really passionate about. So end where we started. Administration, it's not a particularly sexy word, but if you can help take away that administrative burden, you can really make a contribution to a culture like street art or letter writing. So thank you. Cheers.